So that kind of goes into the next question I have for you. Just what are some of these things that you're considering when working with athletes and their nutrition? For example, like obviously if you are working with a soccer player or for example, a wrestler, their diet obviously is going to be much different than if you're working with someone who's like a long distance cross country runner. What are some things you're considering when thinking about like different athletes and kind of the body styles that you kind of are working with?
Yeah, so with athletes, the first thing that you want to consider is their energy requirements. So if you have a way of quantifying their total workload for the day or over the week, then that's going to give you your best guess as to how much they need as far as total calories go, and then also in the form of carbohydrate versus protein and fats.
Yeah.
So like you mentioned, a wrestler, a very weight dependent type of athlete who, wrestlers can get into some pretty dicey situations when they're trying to make weight, especially if they like to train at a higher weight and then do some sort of a dramatic or drastic water cut, which is often done in professional sport. I've never overseen a water cut, nor do I feel qualified to do so, but I do know some of the protocols. Yeah, and they're intense. So as far as what I do, the way that I would assess the needs of the athlete is it's similar to designing a resistance training program. I would do a needs analysis of the sport. Yeah. So what's their training volume? What are the intensities that they train at? How long is the duration of any given session or game? And then allow that to determine overall caloric intake and also macronutrient distribution. Starting first with protein intake. That's less dependent on the volume of training, more dependent on the size of the athlete and their muscle mass. So I tend to stick pretty closely to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight as of lean muscle tissue, being kind of the low end, up to 1 gram of protein per pound of total body mass. Right. Yep. Including fat tissue being kind of the high point. And, there's times when you can maybe go a little lower than that, especially if you need to get more of your calories in the form of carbohydrates.
Makes sense.
After protein, then I go to carbohydrate, again, based on the volume of training, and then you fill in the rest with fats. You can think of fat as like a nutrient buffer. So if you need to add calories and you've already satisfied your protein and carb requirements, adding some fat in makes the food tastier and it's easier to handle. Like you can only handle so much carbohydrate in a day. And sometimes for extreme endurance athletes, it's really difficult to eat so many grams of carbohydrates, and fat makes it more palatable. And likewise, if you're trying to hit a deficit, taking fat out does that very quickly because it's 9 calories per gram.
Yeah, which is more than your protein and carbohydrates.
Yeah, for sure.
So the next question I have for you is just the difference that what's nutrition look like for athletes who are maybe in season versus compared to like off season, and just your take on some of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it totally depends on their goals. But what I would say is if there's any type of body composition alteration goal, meaning gain muscle or lose fat, it should be handled in the off season. The reason is because it's very difficult training wise to gain muscle. And it's very difficult diet-wise to lose fat. Probably easier to lose fat overall than it is to gain muscle. Like it's easier to get shredded just because you don't have to work as hard. It's more of a mental game. But either of those, you don't need that extra fatigue during competition because you'll either be fatigued from training or you'll be fatigued from a caloric deficit and fewer carbohydrate. And you don't want to take that into competition. So for me, the biggest difference, because again, it depends on your athlete and that type of stuff. But the biggest difference almost across the board for all athletes is that any change in body composition should happen in the off season.